Bite mark. This happened 13 years ago now. I still don't know what that was. I wish I could forget it as soon as possible. At the time, I had just moved to Tokyo and didn't know what was right or left. I wandered around the city with a tattered map of Tokyo given to me by my grandfather, which I had no idea when it was. The reason I came to Tokyo was to look for a job. Having been out of work in the countryside, I relied on distant relatives to help me find a job. I don't know about jobs, but I can give you a place to live at a reasonable price. I had never spoken to this man, who was my uncle, except on the phone, and I was completely worried. However, now that I think about it, my uneasy feeling at the time may have been just a bugbear. It was almost dark when I arrived at my intended apartment. A large lady was standing there. She said, "Welcome, my dear. You must be tired. Let me show you around." I followed her lead and entered the dimly lit apartment. Not only was the building in a complicated location, but the building itself extended further back into the apartment, and I felt a strange sense of oppression. Weeds were growing freely. In fact, it was almost sunset, but I felt as if I was entering a dark cave. I was strangely afraid of the fly that had somehow perched on the lady's back, so I clutched my luggage and said in a loud voice, "Well, it's my first time in Tokyo, so there are a lot of people here." Then the lady turned around and yelled, "Quiet." She yelled at me. At that moment, I realized that the woman was an uncle dressed as a woman. I was so disheartened that I could not believe it was a man's voice. I was disheartened and felt the horror of the city at that time. Now I am aware that it was an unusual place. The room was fully furnished, except for the fishy smell, and there was nothing to complain about. However, the rent in Tokyo was expensive at 90,000 yen, no matter how much they offered us at the relative's price. The room was a 6-tatami mat room and a kitchen with a cracked floorboard. The water was unbearably muddy. But I was grateful for my own private toilet. However, the hole in the Japanese-style toilet smelled terrible due to the summer heat. I could smell it even with the lid on. The thick makeup of my aunt, well, uncle shone brightly, and the smell of his disgusting makeup made me nauseous forever. Then the uncle, who had removed his makeup, came to visit again, this time as if nothing had happened, and greeted me. "Thank you for coming so far. I'm sorry I couldn't come to pick you up. A woman answered your call, right? How was it? What? Was she pretty?" The little fat man looked me in the eye. "Would you call it eyeliner?" The makeup was still on my eyes. "Nothing to worry about." When I replied vaguely with only my mouth, the uncle's mood became obviously bad. The smell of the stale air in the room, my greasy sweat, and my uncle's makeup filled the 6-tatami mats, where there was no breeze. That night, I got into the dusty, rumpled futon that had been provided and, tired as I was, I forced myself to sleep. How much time had passed? There were several moving objects in the dark room. I don't know if it was a sign, a sound, or a rotten smell. Anyway, something was around my futon. However, I forced myself to meditate and went to sleep. I was also very tired. The next day, I tried several places to find a part-time job. However, I could not find one, so I ordered a cup of coffee at a coffee shop and felt small and lonely, frightened by the hustle and bustle of the city. Suddenly, my eyes fell on my wrist holding my coffee cup. Bite marks? You have to look closely to notice. But it was clearly marked with a bite mark. I assumed that I must have chewed it in my sleep. It tasted bad to drink coffee with a hand that had a bite mark much smaller than mine. Frankly, I wanted to leave. But the place to return was my apartment. I was scared that I might meet my uncle. With trepidation, I strode back to my room and locked the door. The gore had subsided somewhat, but there was a new lingering scent of makeup in the room. That night, as I slept under the covers, which were covered with a lot of drool, I again felt some presence. I think they were cats, but I was swaying under the covers, sweating in the sweltering heat of what felt like a tropical night. It wasn't really summer yet. However, I couldn't stand the opposite, and in the darkness, I suddenly pulled my hand out of the futon and buzzed it toward the black mass. I wanted to confirm that it was all in my mind. I wanted to make sure it was just my imagination. But the back of my hand hit something cold, and it seemed to hit the wall with such force that it rolled onto the tatami mats. I felt a chill run down my spine when I felt the touch on my hand. It was the same feeling as the cheek I had punched in a fight when I was younger. The black mass rolled around and stopped. Suddenly I understood that it was a human head. A moment later,
"Where am I?"
Suddenly, I heard a low droning voice. Suddenly it cried out in a low, throaty voice. Hearing that cry, I seemed to have fainted. When I awoke, many heads were gone. I was drenched in sweat, so I took off my shirt to wipe myself off. Then I was astonished. My whole body was covered with bite marks. I didn't do it by playing hooky. Evidence of this was the teeth marks on my cheeks that looked like they were going to bleed. And the bite marks varied from large to small. I screamed and tried to leave, but I did not forget to shave. Uncle Auntie never showed up, but I was getting pushed further and further into a corner. In fact, I was acting strangely at this time, even thinking about it now. The most important reason for this may be that I was still sleeping in that room. I had lost more than 10 kilograms and had become so pale that people looked at me with disbelief. I couldn't find a job at all, and I would return home exhausted. The bite marks didn't disappear for a day and were all over my body. One of the interviewers asked me, "What's that?" I couldn't find a good explanation, so I just said, "It looks like you've been bitten," and she laughed. I guess he thought she had done it to him. But I was nearing my limit. I began to see visions and even wore bandages all over my body to hide my teeth marks. Even so, I would walk out in the street and yell out to strangers, "Good morning," to strangers in a loud voice. He seemed to be on the verge of losing his mind. That night, I found a piece of paper and a nutritional drink in my room with a note from my uncle saying it was for me. I was tired, so I drank it down without hesitation. Then I fell into a deeper sleep than usual. When I woke up in the middle of the night, my head was clear. And I clearly realized that the dozen or so black blobs clinging to my body were biting me, which was unusual. He said it's not the time to be scared. Well, yes. I thought I was calm enough to think so, but I must have been at my peak. I woke up with a start, and felt a black mass roll across the tatami mats in the dark room and disappear into the kitchen. I said, "Wait." I shouted, a voice I had never raised before, and went to the kitchen. Then I felt as if those shadows had somehow escaped into the bathroom, so I ran into the bathroom. The toilet was Japanese style, but it was pitch black inside. I tried to turn on the light, but it wouldn't come on, so I turned over the luggage box and grabbed my flashlight. Then, laughing, I pointed the light into the bathroom. I saw the filth illuminated in the darkness. If you look closely, you can see maggots crawling around. And in the middle of it all, looking up at me, were many rotting heads and skeletonized heads, covered in my feces and urine. I screamed and opened the door to run out of the room in my underwear and hit something. I looked and saw a man dressed as a woman lying on the floor with the master key to the room and a saw. "Don't open the door out of the blue." I was so angry and gratuitously angry that I threw stones at him. The uncle screamed and cowered. At some point I realized that the stones I was throwing were human heads. They were biting my uncle more and more. He kept screaming, as if his flesh was being bitten off. I got scared and ran out of the apartment. Since then, I have not been in touch with him, and he has not contacted me. I hope that head is a ghost. Otherwise, I would have been shitting myself every day for the entire time I was in that apartment. 13 years have passed since then, though it is now a distant memory. The single tooth mark on my neck has remained for some time. It may have been the bite mark of the raw head I hit. This is the end of this story. Thank you for listening to the end.